McLean Stevenson once had it all, or so it seemed. He was the heart of MASH, a fan favorite, and part of one of the most successful shows in television history. But just when the spotlight was brightest, his character was written off the show. But while his departure from the show deeply affected fans, few realized just how complex the decision really was. Behind the scenes, there were extremely complicated circumstances that led him to make that decision. So, what prompted McLean Stevenson to leave the show? And did he ever regret his decision? The answers to these questions are both shocking and heartbreaking. Who was McLean Stevenson? McLean Stevenson was more than just an actor, comedian, or writer. He was a man who left a permanent mark on television history forever. But before he made audiences laugh and cry over the bittersweet blend of comedy and tragedy, Stevenson endured a road to stardom that wasn't a straight line. In fact, it took time, struggle, and a touch of luck before he became the lovable and often bewildered Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake on one of the most iconic shows of the 1970s. Edgar McLean Stevenson Jr. was born on November 14, 1927, in Normal, Illinois, into a prominent family. His grandfather, Adlai Stevenson, served as Vice President of the United States under President Grover Cleveland, and public service ran deep in his family, but McLean's passion pulled him in a different direction. After graduating from Northwestern University, where he studied theater and was classmates with future stars like Charlton Heston, Stevenson initially worked in various odd jobs, including as an insurance salesman and advertising executive, before giving acting a serious shot. However, he didn't break into Hollywood right away. For years, Stevenson paid his dues in regional theater and smaller television roles, slowly building experience in comedy and performance. His first substantial work came in the 1960s, when he began writing for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and appearing on shows like That Was the Week That Was. What many people don't realize is that McLean was also a gifted writer. He co-wrote for comedians and sketch shows long before he found recognition as a performer, and his comedic timing, both on the page and in person, helped him stand out in a crowded industry. By the early 1970s, Stevenson was gaining traction as a reliable comic presence. He guest-starred on several sitcoms and variety shows, and even served as a guest host for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, which was no small feat. But it was a different kind of opportunity that changed his life and solidified his place in television history. In 1972, producers Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds were developing a TV adaptation of Robert Altman's 1970 film, MASH. The movie had been a surprise hit, blending the absurdity of wartime with a unique brand of dark humor. And so, when CBS greenlit the series, the casting team needed actors who could deliver both comedy and vulnerability. Stevenson was cast as Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, the commanding officer of the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Blake wasn't your typical commanding officer. He was forgetful, gentle, and often overwhelmed, but that was precisely what made him stand out. Stevenson's portrayal of Henry Blake was subtle and warm. He brought humanity to a character who could have easily been a punchline. Unlike the more rigid military archetypes seen in past war stories, Blake was a man trying to survive the madness by focusing on fishing, his wife, and staying out of the way. He wasn't heroic in the traditional sense, but he was deeply relatable. Underneath the jokes and the bumbling demeanor, there was an authenticity that the audience connected with. MASH premiered on September 17, 1972, and while the show had a slow start in the ratings, it quickly picked up momentum thanks to strong writing and a unique tonal balance of comedy and drama. By the time the second season rolled around, it was clear that the show wasn't just another sitcom, it was groundbreaking television. MASH tackled serious topics like death, trauma, and the absurdity of war, all while making people laugh and often cry. As for McLean Stevenson, he became one of the standout stars of the series. His chemistry with co-stars Alan Alda Wayne Rogers, and Loretta Swit brought a unique rhythm to the show. Viewers loved Blake's awkward charm, and critics appreciated the layers Stevenson added to what could have been a one-note role. In fact, during his time on the show, MASH was nominated for multiple Emmy Awards. And though Stevenson didn't win during his tenure, he was a core part of the show's early critical success. The first 3 seasons of the show are widely credited with establishing the tone and depth that allowed the show to eventually become one of the most respected series in television history. Stevenson's character helped humanize the war zone setting. His performance wasn't just funny. It was warm, genuine, and tinged with quiet sadness, which only made the funny moments more interesting. And so, with the show gaining popularity and Henry Blake becoming one of the most beloved characters on television, it seemed like Stevenson was exactly where he was supposed to be. MASH was flourishing, critics were praising it, and the audience ratings were climbing steadily. By the end of Season 3, the show was in the top 10 most-watched series in America. For many actors, this would have been the peak. After all, he had a secure role on a hit show with growing influence and fan support. But what happened next would shock not just fans, but even the cast and crew. It wasn't just a plot twist. It became one of the most controversial decisions in television history. And at the center of it was McLean Stevenson, a man who had once seemed destined to be part of MASH's legacy for years to come. The shocking exit. McLean Stevenson's portrayal of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake had earned him a place in the hearts of millions. He was the kind of character who brought warmth and light to an often grim setting. But just as the show was reaching new heights, Stevenson made a decision that would send shockwaves through the entertainment world. He wanted out. The timing was baffling. MASH was a certified hit. Ratings were climbing. The writing was being praised as groundbreaking, and Stevenson was beloved by audiences. So why walk away from it all? The answer, while not dramatic in the Hollywood sense, was deeply personal and rooted in Stevenson's long-held ambitions. McLean Stevenson wasn't just an actor. He saw himself as a performer capable of leading a show on his own. And in 1975, after 3 seasons on the show, he felt boxed in. As much as he appreciated the success of the series, Stevenson was growing restless. He believed he could do more, carry his own series, headline as a solo star, and build a television identity beyond the bumbling Henry Blake. In fact, actress Loretta Swit later revealed that Stevenson felt oppressed as just one of the cast members and wanted to be the star of the show. He told her, "I know I will not be in anything as good as this show, but I have to leave and be number 1. But this wasn't arrogance. It was the calculated risk of a man who had spent years climbing through the ranks of the entertainment industry and didn't want to be typecast or stuck as a second lead. He was ambitious, and ambition in Hollywood often comes with consequences. But the choice to leave MASH didn't happen in a vacuum. Behind the scenes, Stevenson had begun to feel that his role was limited, especially compared to Alan Alda's character, Hawkeye Pierce, who was increasingly becoming the central figure of the show. Stevenson, who had once hoped for more balanced screen time and character development, began to see the writing on the wall that if he stayed, he might always come in second place to Alan Alda in comic relief, while others carried the emotional weight. And that wasn't enough for him. So he made his decision not to return for Season 4 of the show. But what truly stunned viewers, and even the cast, was what the show's producers did next. When McLean Stevenson announced his departure, the writers and producers were faced with a question: how do you write off Henry Blake? In most sitcoms at the time, characters who left a show were either quietly replaced or sent away with vague explanations. Death, especially sudden and tragic death, was virtually unheard of in a comedy series. But MASH was no ordinary sitcom. And so, producer and head writer Larry Gelbart, along with co-producer Gene Reynolds, decided to do something bold that had never been done on television before. Henry Blake wouldn't be transferred to another post or reassigned off-screen. He would die. And not just die, but be killed in action, off-screen, after the audience thought he had made it home safely. In the final episode of Season 3, Henry Blake is given his discharge papers. The entire camp gathers to send him off with tears, cheers, and hugs. It feels like a heartfelt farewell, and for most of the episode, it plays like a typical emotional send-off. Stevenson's final scenes were filmed with sincerity and a genuine sense of goodbye, but the true ending was kept secret, even from the cast. In the final moments of the episode, Radar, played by Gary Berghoff, walks into the operating room with a stunned expression and a piece of paper in hand. He announces, "Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors." The room immediately fell silent. The cast was in complete shock because it was filmed to get their original reactions. The audience at home was devastated. Fans had tuned in, expecting a bittersweet goodbye. But instead, they were hit with a gut punch that felt more like a war casualty than a TV plot twist. Some viewers were outraged, some were heartbroken, and they began sending letters to the show's producers, because television simply didn't do that in the 1970s. Sitcoms were supposed to be safe. What many didn't know at the time was that even the cast hadn't been told how the episode would end. The final page of the script, the one containing Radar's announcement, was deliberately withheld. The creators wanted the reactions to be real, and they were. When Berghoff delivered the line, the stunned silence from the actors wasn't acting. It was pure disbelief. But this creative decision wasn't made out of spite toward Stevenson. In fact, Gelbart later explained that it was about realism. In war, people die, even the people you love. By killing off Henry Blake, MASH made a statement that the show wasn't just comedy. It was storytelling grounded in the brutality of conflict. And while controversial, it became one of the most iconic moments in television history. For McLean Stevenson, the exit was final. He never returned to the show, and the role of Henry Blake was never recast. But the shockwaves of that episode didn't just change how audiences saw MASH, they changed what television was capable of doing. But most people didn't realize that the show had been through its own fair share of behind-the-scenes tension within the cast and crew. There were creative differences, jealousy, and a growing imbalance in power that would define the show's legacy. The tensions behind the scenes. While MASH was winning over critics and audiences with its brilliant writing and emotional depth, life behind the camera wasn't always as harmonious as it seemed on screen. For all the chemistry that McLean Stevenson shared with his co-stars, there were undercurrents of tension, some of them minor, others serious enough to leave a mark. These weren't publicized at the time, but later accounts and interviews revealed that the beloved show had its share of behind-the-scenes friction. One of the more notable relationships was between McLean Stevenson and Gary Berghoff, who played Radar O'Reilly. On screen, the two often shared a charming, almost paternal dynamic. Blake's goofy confusion matched well with Radar's hyper-competence. But off-camera, their working relationship was more complicated. Stevenson reportedly admired Gary's raw talent. Radar had become one of the show's breakout characters, and Gary's performance, especially his subtle comedic timing and emotional vulnerability, added depth to the role. But admiration didn't always translate into compatibility. According to reports, Stevenson and Berghoff found each other difficult to work with at times, and they frequently clashed over small things. Part of the tension came from Berghoff's approach to acting. He was intensely focused, often immersing himself in his character and paying attention to every detail. Stevenson, who had a background in comedy and writing, preferred a looser, more relaxed set environment. That difference in style sometimes led to miscommunication, and over time, the friction became more noticeable. The two weren't enemies, but they didn't exactly spend time together when the cameras stopped rolling. In fact, in an interview, Stevenson once confessed that he shared a love-hate relationship with Gary, saying, "Probably, of the six of us, he did the best job as an actor. He's a brilliant actor. But sometimes I was a problem for him, and he sometimes was a problem for me." But Gary Berghoff didn't just have a rocky dynamic with Stevenson. There was another infamous behind-the-scenes tension, this time involving Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John. According to long-standing rumors and reports, there was an explosive moment when Rogers allegedly threw a chair at Berghoff in frustration. The incident, which took place during a particularly stressful day on set, wasn't caught on camera, but it became part of the show's legacy. Rogers, known for his easygoing Southern charm, had reached a breaking point, and details about what sparked the moment are vague. But in spite of the occasional behind-the-scenes drama, McLean Stevenson remained a well-liked figure in Hollywood. He had a gentle demeanor that many found refreshing. He wasn't interested in power struggles or egos. He genuinely just wanted to perform and make people laugh. That sense of humility helped him maintain strong friendships across the industry, even after leaving MASH. Colleagues often described him as kind-hearted and easy to talk to, and even those who clashed with him respected him. Still, the aftermath of his exit from a show as big as MASH brought its own challenges. He had walked away from a juggernaut, a show that only grew more beloved after his departure, and now he had to prove that the gamble was worth it, that he could lead a successful show of his own and become the star he believed he was meant to be. But what followed was a string of decisions that didn't pan out the way Stevenson had hoped. And what happened to him after he left the show doesn't end well. The struggles after MASH. When McLean Stevenson walked away from MASH, he didn't expect the door to shut quite so firmly behind him. He left the series with confidence, hoping to build something new, star in his own show, and build a platform that would allow him to step out of the ensemble spotlight and take center stage. For a man with Stevenson's comedic instincts and industry experience, it seemed like a reasonable bet. But television is a different kind of battlefield, and what came next was a painful reminder of just how unforgiving Hollywood could be. His first major project after MASH was The McLean Stevenson Show, launched by NBC in 1976. It was positioned as a family comedy, with Stevenson playing Mac Ferguson, an advertising executive trying to raise his children after the death of his wife. The tone was lighter than MASH, and the stakes were far lower. But from the beginning, something was missing. The writing felt flat. The humor didn't land the way it did in his previous work, and most critically, audiences didn't connect with it. Despite some initial curiosity of viewers tuning in to see what Henry Blake was doing next, the show failed to gain traction. It struggled in the ratings and was quietly canceled after just 12 episodes. For Stevenson, the disappointment was sharp. He had taken a leap, left a beloved series at its peak, and now found himself holding on to a show that disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. Hollywood often gives second chances, especially to actors with recognizable names and faces. So Stevenson tried again, this time with a new project, Hello, Larry. Premiering in 1979, Hello, Larry cast Stevenson as Larry Alder, a radio talk show host raising two teenage daughters in Portland after a divorce. NBC had high hopes for the show. In fact, they went so far as to connect it to the popular sitcom Different Strokes by crossing over characters and even building it into the same television universe. The network was clearly banking on Stevenson's charm and name recognition to carry the series into long-term success. But Hello, Larry quickly became the punchline of a different kind of story. Critics panned it almost immediately. The writing was criticized as uninspired, and while Stevenson tried to carry the material with his natural likability, it just wasn't enough. Ratings fell, and although the show limped into a second season, it couldn't recover. Eventually, Hello, Larry was canceled, and Stevenson's second attempt to headline a series was over. By now, a pattern had emerged. While McLean Stevenson remained a familiar and well-liked face, his post-MASH projects lacked the magic that made the original series so special. He began making regular guest appearances on different shows where his comedic timing still got people laughing, but the leading man roles he had hoped for never really materialized in a lasting way. The shadow of MASH loomed around him. Every new project came with an unspoken comparison to the character of Henry Blake, and unfortunately, none of them were as good as MASH. The decision to leave the show, bold as it was, had placed Stevenson on a different career trajectory. Instead of riding the wave of MASH's continued success, he was now chasing it from the outside, hoping each new series would recapture the lightning in a bottle that he had once been part of. In later years, Stevenson spoke openly and often honestly about his departure from the show. In one memorable interview, he said, "When I left the show, the mistake was not in leaving. The mistake was that I thought everybody in America loved McLean Stevenson. That was not the case. Everybody loved Henry Blake. So, if you go and do the McLean Stevenson show, nobody cares about McLean Stevenson." There was no bitterness in his voice, but there was a clear sense of reflection. He didn't deny that he had been chasing more control, a bigger spotlight, and a deeper role, but he also acknowledged that walking away from a hit show was probably a wrong move. But despite his regrets, he still maintained a sense of humor about his journey. He sometimes joked about his poor choices and the cancellation of his later projects. Although Stevenson never stopped working, the big comeback never came. He was still recognizable, still invited to events, still the man people remembered fondly as Henry Blake. But as years passed, the roles got smaller, and the spotlight moved elsewhere. And while Stevenson never blamed anyone else for the way things turned out, his later years would reveal a more personal set of struggles, not just with his career, but with his health, aging, and the quiet battles that never make it into the headlines. Stevenson's later years and health struggles. McLean Stevenson was known for his warm demeanor, his sharp wit, and his ability to bring humor to almost any situation. But beneath that light-hearted surface, the years following his departure from MASH took an emotional toll. Friends and colleagues began to notice subtle changes in him, and although he was still friendly and upbeat in public, the confidence that once fueled his bold decision to leave MASH had given way to something more introspective. Regret crept in and weighed on him in quiet, persistent ways. In multiple interviews, Stevenson didn't hide his disappointment. He acknowledged that walking away from the show had been a gamble that didn't pay off the way he had hoped. It was rare to see that kind of honesty in Hollywood, especially from someone who had once sat at the top. But Stevenson never pretended. He owned his choices, even when they brought more pain than reward. Professionally, the constant cycle of canceled shows, fleeting guest spots, and unrealized projects brought him a deeper kind of exhaustion. He kept showing up and kept working, but there was a heaviness behind the smile. And for a performer who once brought so much joy to others, the inability to sustain his own career momentum became more than just a professional concern. It became personal. But behind the scenes, Stevenson was dealing with something even more serious. In his later years, though it was never widely publicized, McLean Stevenson reportedly began battling bladder cancer. Stevenson kept his condition private, but insider reports revealed that he underwent surgery for bladder cancer. And while there were hopes for recovery, the experience marked a turning point in his life. His energy declined and his appearances became more scarce. Cancer is a ruthless opponent, but Stevenson handled it in the same way he had handled his career setbacks, with quiet endurance and no public complaint. He didn't make his illness a part of his identity. He didn't seek to be defined by it, but the toll it took was undeniable. Battling cancer is a full-time fight, one that tests the body and the spirit. And for someone already grappling with years of professional disappointment, it added a new layer of strain. And then, on February 15, 1996, while still in recovery, McLean Stevenson died from a sudden heart attack at Encino Tarzana Regional Medical Center in Los Angeles at the age of 68. The news shocked fans and saddened the television world. In the aftermath, there were warm and heartfelt tributes that were tinged with nostalgia. Co-stars, fans, and industry colleagues remembered him as kind, generous, and incredibly talented. But there was another question lingering beneath the sadness that didn't have a clear answer. Did McLean Stevenson's post-MASH struggles contribute to his health decline? It's not an easy question to ask, and certainly not one to answer lightly. But in Hollywood, the lines between emotional well-being and physical health often blur. Stress, disappointment, and regret don't always show up on a chart, but they leave their mark. Stevenson had spent 2 decades trying to reclaim something he once walked away from, and while he did so with humor and humility, the strain was real. And for those who followed his journey from the top of the ratings to the quiet exits of canceled sitcoms, it's hard not to wonder if the industry took more from him than it gave in those final years. In the end, McLean Stevenson's later life was defined by a kind of quiet dignity. He simply kept moving forward, kept showing up, even when the rewards were fewer and the road was harder. He had once been at the center of one of the most beloved shows in television history, and while he may have spent the rest of his career trying to recapture that lightning, he never lost the respect of those who worked with him or the affection of the fans who never forgot Henry Blake. But the question is, did McLean Stevenson really make a mistake when he left MASH? Or was he just one of many who believed, perhaps too strongly, that television would give him another shot? Did Stevenson make a mistake? Looking back on McLean Stevenson's life and career, the question that inevitably lingers is, did he make a mistake by leaving MASH? Or was his story more complicated than a single career move gone wrong? The man was never one-dimensional. He was born into a prominent Illinois political family. He was related to Mlan Stevenson II, the former governor of Illinois and a 2-time unsuccessful presidential candidate. This meant that McLean Stevenson had early exposure to the political world. If life had gone differently, he might have followed a path into public service, diplomacy, or political commentary. He was sharp, articulate, and understood the mechanics of power and personality. But Hollywood called louder, and he followed that call with optimism, not arrogance. And he wasn't without other talents. Stevenson had a distinctive voice and a laugh that people remembered. That laugh became a kind of trademark during his time on MASH. In another version of his career, he might have pivoted to voice acting. These avenues were open, and in the rapidly expanding media landscape of the 80s and 90s, there were places he could have thrived. But perhaps he was too tied to the idea of front-facing stardom, too invested in recreating the sitcom success that had come so quickly the first time. In the twilight of his career, the roles grew smaller, quieter. His final television appearances came in shows like The Love Boat and Diagnosis: Murder, which were guest spots that offered brief glimpses of the charm that once made him a household name. But there was no grand comeback, no late career reinvention. His exit from the spotlight was gentle, almost unnoticeable. The industry moved on, and he did too. But while his later projects may have faded, one thing never did. Henry Blake. Decades after Stevenson's death, his portrayal of Colonel Henry Blake remains one of the most beloved characters in television history. So, was leaving the show a mistake? Well, in terms of career trajectory, perhaps. Stevenson himself admitted as much in later interviews. But in a broader sense, maybe not. He followed his instincts. He took a risk because he believed in himself. And to many, that's not failure, it's courage. But what do you think? Did McLean Stevenson make a mistake by leaving MASH? Tell us in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.